In a weathered workshop tucked away in a modest neighborhood, Thomas Miller crafts beauty from broken things. His calloused hands, shaped by 40 years of carpentry work, move with gentle precision as he repairs old furniture and mends forgotten treasures. But on this autumn afternoon, something different catches his attention through the dusty window, a little girl's sobs echoing from the nearby park. Her cherished doll lies broken beyond repair, fragments scattered in the fading sunlight. Without hesitation, Thomas gathers scraps of fabric, bits of wood, and pieces from his old toolbox. What happens in the next 24 hours will change not only his life, but the future of an entire industry. Could a simple act of kindness really reshape the destiny of a man who never asked for more than the quiet satisfaction of working with his hands? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sawdust motes danced in the morning light that filtered through Thomas Miller's workshop windows, each beam illuminating decades of dedication carved into every surface. The leather toolbox resting on his workbench had been his father's before him, a graduation gift presented 40 years ago with calloused hands and quiet pride. Inside, each tool told its own story. The hammer, with its worn grip, shaped perfectly to his palm after countless strikes. The chisel set, meticulously maintained and sharp enough to whisper through oak. And the measuring tape that had measured more hopes and dreams than mere inches. Thomas ran his fingers along the toolbox's weathered surface, feeling the familiar scratches and dents that marked years of faithful service. At 62, he found himself becoming more like this old companion, weathered but reliable, shaped by experience rather than diminished by it. The morning ritual of opening the shop had become as natural as breathing. Unlock the heavy wooden doctor at precisely 7, flip the sign to open, and breathe in the comforting aroma of wood shavings and furniture polish that had permeated the walls since before he was born. The workshop itself was a testament to time's gentle passage. Photographs dotted the walls. His father teaching him to sand his first table, his late wife Margaret beaming beside their first delivery truck, and countless pieces they'd brought back to life together. Each image was slightly faded, like well-loved memories softening around the edges. The walls themselves were lined with shelves, holding pieces waiting for his attention. A Victorian rocking chair with a broken spindle, an Art Deco lamp missing its shade, a child's toy truck with a wheel gone astray. "Good morning, old friends," he murmured to the waiting projects, a habit Margaret had once teased him about, but had secretly found endearing. The morning light caught the gold of his wedding band as he reached for his work apron, the same one she'd given him on their last Christmas together. 5 years had passed since her passing, but her presence lingered in every corner of the shop, in every piece he restored, with the same care she'd shown to their customers. The bell above the door chimed, announcing his first visitor of the day. Mrs. Henderson, 83 and sharp as ever, carefully navigated her way in with her grandson's support. In her arms, she cradled what appeared to be a music box. "Thomas Miller, you're a sight for sore eyes," she declared, her voice carrying the warmth of decades of friendship. "This old thing stopped playing last week. My Christopher gave it to me on our first anniversary, 58 years ago this March." Thomas carefully took the box from her hands, noting the fine inlay work and the slightly loose hinges. "Beautiful craftsmanship on this one, Helen. Swiss-made, I'd say. Probably late 1940s. His fingers traced the patterns with knowing precision. The mechanisms likely just needed a good cleaning and oiling. Should have it singing again by Thursday. Mrs. Henderson's face lit up with the same joy he'd seen countless times before. It wasn't just about fixing things. It was about preserving memories, keeping stories alive. "You're a miracle worker, Thomas. I don't know what this neighborhood would do without you." As he wrote up the receipt, using the same style of carbon paper his father had favored, Thomas reflected on how these interactions formed the fabric of his days. Each item that came through his door carried its own history, its own importance to someone. A broken chair wasn't just furniture, it was where a mother had rocked 3 generations of children. A damaged picture frame wasn't mere wood and glass, but the guardian of precious moments frozen in time. The morning proceeded with its familiar rhythm. He worked steadily on a bureau drawer that had been sticking, carefully planning down the wood that had swollen with age and humidity. His movements were unhurried but purposeful, each stroke of the plane releasing fresh scents of oak into the air. The radio on his workbench played classical music softly, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, Margaret's favorite. Around 11, Jimmy from the coffee shop across the street brought in his usual delivery, 1 black coffee and a blueberry muffin, just as he had every day for the past decade. "Business good, Mr. Miller?" the young man asked, lingering as he often did to watch Thomas work. "Steady as she goes, Jimmy. Just like your father's coffee, reliable as sunrise." Thomas smiled, remembering when Jimmy had been too small to see over the counter at his family's shop. Now he was running the place, keeping his own father's traditions, alive while adding his own touch. "How's that espresso machine working since I adjusted the pressure gauge?" "Like new, Mr. Miller. Dad says you've got magic in those hands of yours." Thomas chuckled, taking a sip of the perfectly brewed coffee. "No magic, son. Just patience and respect for the work. Everything has its own voice if you listen closely enough, even machines." He gestured to the bureau he was working on. "This piece here, the wood tells you exactly what it needs if you pay attention. Too many people these days want to rush, force things, but good work takes time, just like good coffee." As Jimmy left, Thomas returned to his task, but his mind wandered to the growing pile of catalogs on his desk, advertising new furniture, mass-produced pieces that lacked the soul of the ones he repaired. He'd seen how people increasingly opted to replace rather than restore, choosing convenience over character. Yet his loyal customers, like Mrs. Henderson, understood the value of things that carried history in their joints and finish. The morning light had shifted to afternoon gold. When he finished with the bureau, its drawer now sliding with the smooth precision it had possessed when it was first crafted, he stood back, stretching his back and admiring the way the restored finish caught the light. Another piece saved from the landfill, another set of memories preserved for future generations. It was then that he heard it, the sound that would set in motion events he could never have anticipated. A child's sob carrying through his workshop window, clear and heartbreaking in the quiet afternoon air. The sobs drew Thomas to his workshop window, its panes still bearing the swirls and imperfections of century-old glass. Through them, he could see the small neighborhood park across the street, usually a cheerful place filled with the sounds of children playing on the old swing set. But this afternoon, there was only one child, a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, sitting alone on the worn wooden bench beneath the maple tree. Her dark curls fell forward, obscuring her face as she bent over something in her lap. Even from this distance, Thomas could see her shoulders shaking with each sob. Something about her solitude struck him deeply. Children shouldn't cry alone, he thought, remembering how Margaret would always stop whatever she was doing to comfort any distressed child who wandered into their shop. Thomas hesitated, his hand resting on the window frame. The world had changed since Margaret's time. These days, a stranger approaching a crying child could be misunderstood, no matter how pure the intention. Yet as he watched, no parent appeared to comfort her, no nanny rushed to her side. Just a little girl, her grief echoing across the empty park. Making his decision, Thomas removed his work apron and stepped outside. The autumn air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and his boots crunched softly on the gravel path as he approached. He deliberately kept his footsteps audible, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me, miss?" he called softly when he was still several feet away. "Is everything all right?" The little girl looked up, and Thomas's heart clenched at the sight of her tear-stained face. In her hands lay the remains of what must have been a beautiful porcelain doll. Its head had separated completely from its body, and one arm hung limply, attached by only a few threads. The doll's painted face, with its delicate features and rosy cheeks, stared sightlessly skyward. I didn't mean to," she hiccuped, fresh tears welling in her brown eyes. "She was my grandmother's, and I just wanted to make her dance, but then she fell and—" Her voice broke as she gestured helplessly at the broken pieces. Thomas approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench beside her. When she nodded, he sat down, noticing how she clutched the broken doll protectively closer. "My name is Thomas," he said gently. "I fix things in that workshop right across the street. Would you mind telling me your name?" she sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her expensive-looking jacket. "Sarah," she whispered. "Are you really someone who fixes things?" Thomas nodded, carefully studying the doll from where he sat. The porcelain was fine quality, probably European, at least 70 or 80 years old. "I am. I've been fixing things for longer than you've been alive. Would you like to tell me about your doll?" Sarah's face brightened slightly through her tears. "Her name is Clara. My grandmother gave her to me before she went to heaven last month. She said Clara was her best friend when she was my age." Her lower lip trembled. "Now I've ruined her. Mum's going to be so upset. She told me to be careful with Clara, but I forgot, and I just wanted to show her to my friend Emma." The grief in her voice was about more than just a broken doll, Thomas realized. This was about a connection to someone lost, a precious link to a grandmother now gone. He thought of his own toolbox, passed down from his father, and how devastating it would have been to break it when he was young. "May I take a closer look at Clara?" he asked. "I promised to be very careful." Sarah hesitated, then slowly extended her hands, offering the broken doll. Thomas accepted it with the same reverence he showed to all treasured possessions brought to his shop. The damage was severe, not just the separated head and loose arm, but hairline cracks spreading across the porcelain like delicate spider webs, the kind of repair that would require specialized materials he didn't have, and even then, the doll would never be quite the same. "I see," he said thoughtfully, handling each piece with gentle care. "Clara's had quite an accident, hasn't she? Sometimes when things break, they can't be fixed exactly as they were before." He paused, seeing fresh tears well up in Sarah's eyes. "But you know what? Sometimes when we can't fix something the old way, we have to think about a new way to make it special again." Sarah looked at him questioningly, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What do you mean?" Thomas carefully laid the broken doll pieces on a clean handkerchief between them. "Well, when something very precious breaks, we have two choices. We can be sad about what we've lost, or we can honor its memory by creating something new that carries the same love. Your grandmother gave you Clara because she wanted you to have something to remember her by, something to make you smile. I don't think she would want you to be this sad." "But Clara was special," Sarah insisted, her voice small but firm. "Yes, she was," Thomas agreed, "and she still is. But maybe—" He paused, an idea forming in his mind. "Maybe Clara needs a friend. Someone new but just as special in her own way. Would you like to see something in my workshop? Your mother or guardian would need to come with you, of course." Sarah glanced uncertainly toward the far end of the park. "My nanny Emma is getting us ice cream. She said to wait here." She pointed to a small ice cream cart near the park entrance, where a young woman in a neat uniform was paying for their treats. Thomas nodded, understanding the situation better now. "Well then, how about this? I'll wrap Clara up carefully in this handkerchief to keep all her pieces safe. When your nanny returns, you can both come to my workshop, and I'll show you something that might help. Would that be all right?" As if on cue, Emma approached, carrying 2 ice cream cones and wearing a concerned expression that softened slightly when she saw Thomas's gentle demeanor and the careful way he was handling the broken doll. Thomas stood, introducing himself and explaining the situation, while Sarah watched anxiously, her ice cream forgotten in her hands. The nanny's initial wariness gave way to cautious hope as Thomas pointed out his workshop and explained his profession. "It's right there, see? Where the sign says Miller's Repairs. You can see everything through the windows. They're quite large, and I promise it won't take long." Emma looked at Sarah's hopeful face and nodded slowly. "We can stay for a few minutes," she agreed, "but we'll need to call your mother soon about Clara." As they crossed the street together, Thomas felt a familiar spark of creativity stirring in his mind. He couldn't restore the porcelain doll to its former glory, but perhaps he could create something even more meaningful, something that would help a grieving child hold on to her grandmother's memory while making new ones of her own. The workshop's familiar warmth enveloped them as Thomas led Sarah and Emma inside. He cleared a space on his cleanest workbench, carefully laying out the handkerchief containing Clara's broken pieces. Sarah stood on tiptoe to watch, her ice cream finished, while Emma hung back near the door, maintaining a protective but curious distance. "Now then," Thomas said, opening his father's toolbox with deliberate ceremony, "let me show you something special." He reached past his regular tools to a small compartment in the bottom, a hidden treasure trove he'd maintained for decades. From it, he withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft flannel. "Your grandmother gave you Clara because she wanted to share something precious with you," he explained, unwrapping the bundle. "My father did something similar for me. These were his special carving tools, meant for the finest detail work. He taught me that the smallest touches often mean the most." Inside the flannel lay an array of miniature chisels and carving implements, their wooden handles burnished to a warm glow by years of use. Sarah's eyes widened as Thomas selected one, its tip no larger than a pencil point. "Would you like to help me make something?" he asked, reaching for a piece of maple wood he'd been saving for a special project. It was pale cream in color, with a subtle grain that caught the light like flowing water. Sometimes when we lose something precious, we can honor it by creating something new. Sarah nodded solemnly, her earlier tears forgotten in the face of this new mystery. Thomas pulled up a sturdy stool for her, positioning it safely at the corner of the workbench. Emma moved closer, her professional reserve softening as she watched Thomas begin to work. "First, we need to listen to the wood," Thomas explained, running his fingers along the maple's surface. "Every piece has its own story to tell, its own way of wanting to be shaped." His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he began to sketch on the wood with a soft pencil, creating flowing lines that gradually suggested a form. "See how the grain moves here?" He pointed to a particularly beautiful swirl in the wood. "That's going to become her face. The wood is already showing us where her features want to be." His knife began to move, releasing delicate curls of maple that fell like pale ribbons onto the workbench. Sarah leaned forward, fascinated. "She's going to be beautiful," she whispered, watching as a gentle curve emerged from the wood, the beginning of a cheek, smooth as a pearl. Thomas worked steadily, his movements precise but unhurried. "You know, when I was about your age, I broke something special too," he shared, carefully rounding the doll's chin. "It was a music box my mother loved. I thought my world had ended, but my father showed me how to make something new from the pieces of my mistake. That's when I learned that sometimes our greatest gifts come from our deepest sorrows." As he carved, he kept up a gentle stream of conversation, explaining each step in terms Sarah could understand. He showed her how different tools created different textures, how sandpaper could smooth rough edges to silk, how the wood seemed to come alive under his touch. Emma had pulled up another stool, her phone forgotten in her pocket, as she watched the doll take shape. From his collection of treasures, Thomas produced small pieces of worn silk, remnants of Margaret's wedding dress that he'd kept all these years. "These will become her dress," he explained, selecting a piece in pale blue that shimmered like morning sky. "My wife would have loved knowing they'd find such a special purpose." He taught Sarah how to smooth the silk over his finger with careful strokes, showing her how to avoid wrinkles in the fabric. Together, they chose tiny pearl buttons from an ancient sewing box, each one iridescent with age. "These are like little moons," Sarah observed, holding one up to the light. "Like the ones my grandmother and I used to count at bedtime." Thomas nodded, understanding. "Then we'll make sure to use them in a way that reminds you of those special nights." He arranged the buttons in a graceful curve along the doll's bodice, creating a pattern that mimicked the phases of the moon. For the hair, he had something extraordinary. A small packet of mohair saved from his first restoration project, its fibers fine as gossamer and the color of honey in sunlight. "This is very special," he told Sarah as he showed her how to gently separate the strands. "It's been waiting almost 40 years for exactly the right project." As the afternoon light began to shift, the doll took on her final form. She was nothing. Like Clara, where the porcelain doll had been formal and delicate, this new creation was warm and inviting. Her wooden face held a gentle smile, hand-carved with such care that it seemed to change slightly, depending on how you looked at her. The blue silk dress floated like a summer cloud, secured with the pearl buttons that caught and held the light. Her mohair curls were styled in a way that suggested movement, as if a breeze had just passed through them, but it was the final touch that transformed her from merely beautiful to magical. From another corner of his father's toolbox, Thomas withdrew a tiny silver bell, green with age. "This was on my first toy," he explained, carefully attaching it to a delicate ribbon around the doll's waist. "Listen." He moved the doll gently, and the bell chimed with a sound like starlight made audible. Sarah's face glowed with wonder. "She makes music." "Yes, she does." Thomas adjusted the ribbon carefully. "So whenever you play with her, you'll hear a special song. And maybe, when you ring her bell, you can imagine it's ringing all the way up to heaven, letting your grandmother know you're thinking of her." Emma checked her phone, startling slightly. "Sarah, we should call your mother. We've been here much. Longer than I planned." She paused, looking at the doll with genuine appreciation. "Though I can see why we lost track of time." Thomas carefully wrapped the new doll in a fresh piece of soft flannel, but before he could hand it to Sarah, she threw her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "She's even more special than Clara." Thomas patted her shoulder gently, his heart full. "Would you like to know a secret?" he asked, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Every time we create something with love, we add a little more magic to the world. Your grandmother knew that. That's why she gave you Clara, and now you know it too." As he watched Sarah cradle her new doll, Thomas felt a familiar satisfaction, the joy of creating something that would be treasured. What he couldn't know was that this simple act of kindness was about to change not only his life, but the lives of countless children yet to come. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn sunlight painting the park's maple trees in shades of amber and gold. Thomas had spent the evening making final adjustments to the doll, reinforcing seams, double-checking joints, and adding a few subtle touches that had come to him in the quiet hours. He'd worked until midnight, driven by a feeling he couldn't quite name, as if this simple doll somehow carried more significance than its humble materials suggested. Now he sat on the worn park bench, the doll nestled in a small box lined with tissue paper, waiting for Sarah and Emma's regular morning walk that he'd learned about during yesterday's conversation. The bell on the nearby church tower struck 9, and right on schedule, he spotted them entering the park from the opposite gate. Sarah saw him immediately, her face lighting up as she pulled Emma along by the hand. She wore a different expensive coat today, deep blue with silver buttons that reminded Thomas of the doll's dress. But her expression carried the same open warmth he'd seen yesterday beneath the tears. "Mr. Miller, you came." She bounded up to the bench, almost vibrating with excitement. Emma followed at a more measured pace, offering Thomas a warm smile that held none of yesterday's initial wariness. "I had a feeling you might pass by," Thomas said, patting the bench beside him, "and I thought you might like to give our friend a proper good morning." He lifted the box onto his lap, noting how Sarah's eyes fixed on it immediately. "Is she really finished?" Sarah asked, settling beside him with unusual care, as if afraid any sudden movement might startle the doll inside the box. Thomas nodded, slowly lifting the lid. "She had a few things to tell me last night about how she wanted to be," he explained, folding back the tissue paper. "Sometimes the best ideas come in the quiet hours when everything else is still." Sarah's soft gasp of delight made his heart swell. The doll lay nestled in her paper bed, the morning light catching the pearl buttons and making them glow like tiny moons. Her maple wood face seemed even more alive in the natural light, the carved smile holding secrets of its own. The mohair curls caught the breeze, dancing slightly as if the doll was just waking up herself. "Oh," Sarah breathed, reaching out but stopping just short of touching. "She looks like she's about to speak." Thomas gently lifted the doll from her box. "Would you like to hold her? She's quite sturdy, I made sure of that. She's meant to be played with, not just looked at." As he placed the doll in Sarah's waiting hands, the silver bell at her waist chimed softly. Sarah's eyes widened at the sound, and Thomas saw tears gathering. But these were different from yesterday's tears of loss. These spoke of wonder, of connection found rather than broken. "Listen to her voice," Thomas said softly. "That bell came from my very first toy, given to me by my father. It's been waiting all these years to sing for the right person." He showed Sarah how to hold the doll so she could dance, the bell creating a delicate melody with each movement. "She's dancing with the wind," Sarah said, watching the silk dress flutter. Then she looked up at Thomas, her expression suddenly serious. "Does she have a name?" Thomas shook his head. "Not yet. She's been waiting for you to tell her what it should be." Sarah studied the doll's face intently, turning her gently to catch different angles of light. The carved smile seemed to shift and change with each movement, sometimes mysterious, sometimes joyful, always warm. "Grace," she finally declared, "because she's graceful like a dancer, and because grandmother always said grace was finding beauty in broken things." Emma, who had been quietly watching, knelt down beside the bench. "That's a lovely name, Sarah, and very appropriate." She touched one of the pearl buttons gently. "This is remarkable craftsmanship, Mr. Miller. I've never seen anything quite like it." Thomas felt his cheeks warm at the praise. "Sometimes our hands know things our minds haven't figured out yet. I just followed where the wood and the silk wanted to go." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small envelope. "I've written down some special instructions. How to keep her joints moving smoothly. How to clean the silk if it gets dirty. Little things like that. And if she ever needs any repairs or adjustments, you know where to find me." Sarah clutched Grace closer, the bell chiming softly. "But she won't break, will she? Not like Clara." "She's made to last," Thomas assured her. "But even if something did happen, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Remember what we learned yesterday? Sometimes when things break, we discover new ways to make them special again." Sarah nodded solemnly, then suddenly threw her arms around Thomas's neck, the doll pressed between them. "Thank you," she whispered. "She's the most wonderful thing ever." Thomas patted her back gently, his throat tight with emotion. When Sarah pulled away, he saw Emma dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The nanny quickly composed herself, checking her watch. "We should head home, Sarah. Your mother will be waiting for your morning lessons." As they stood to leave, Thomas remembered something. Reaching into the box, he withdrew a small wooden stand, carved from the same maple as Grace's face. "For when she needs to rest," he explained, showing Sarah how the doll could stand perfectly balanced on the simple base. "Every dancer needs a stage." Sarah's delighted smile was almost as bright as the morning sun. She arranged Grace carefully on the stand, watching as the breeze played with her dress and hair. The bell chimed one more time, clear and sweet in the autumn air. "Mr. Miller?" Sarah asked as Emma gently urged her toward the park gate. "Could we come visit sometimes, to tell you how Grace is doing?" "Any time you'd like," Thomas replied, his heart full. "My workshop door is always open." He watched them walk away, Sarah holding Grace with the kind of care usually reserved for things far more precious than wood and silk and tiny silver bells. The doll's creation had awakened something in him, a spark of creativity he hadn't felt since Margaret's passing, a reminder of why he'd fallen in love with his craft in the first place. What Thomas didn't know, as he gathered up the empty box and headed back to his workshop, was that Sarah wasn't the only one who'd witnessed Grace's unveiling. A jogger in expensive running gear had paused on the path behind them, watching the entire scene unfold with increasing interest. Now she pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen as she composed an email to her boss, a woman named Eleanor Hayes, who happened to be both Sarah's mother and the CEO of the largest toy company in America. The morning newspaper lay unopened on Thomas's workbench, its headline buried beneath a client's antique music box. He'd been so absorbed in his work lately that he barely glanced at the business section anymore, missing the story that would have caught his eye. Hayes Toys faces growing concerns over product safety. But even if he had read it, he wouldn't have made the connection to the little girl with the broken doll. Instead, his thoughts remained on Grace, wondering how Sarah was getting along with her new companion. He'd spent the morning fixing a grandfather clock's chime, but his mind kept drifting to other possibilities, variations on the doll's design, different woods that might sing in new ways under his tools, other ancient treasures hiding in his father's toolbox that could find new life in young hands. The workshop door's bell chimed, pulling him from his reverie. Mrs. Henderson stood there, but something was different about her usual Wednesday visit. Rather than bringing another item for repair, she clutched a smartphone in her arthritis-gnarled fingers. "Thomas Miller," she announced with unusual formality, "you've become quite the talk of the neighborhood." She made her way to his workbench, moving aside the newspaper to set down her phone. "My granddaughter just sent me this video. It's all over that Instagram thing she's always telling me about." Thomas wiped his hands on his apron and peered at the screen. There, in slightly shaky footage, clearly shot from a distance, he watched himself presenting Grace to Sarah in the park. The morning sunlight caught the doll's pearl buttons just as he remembered. And even through the phone's tiny speaker, the silver bell's chime carried its magic. "Helen, I don't understand," he said, watching the scene unfold. "Who would—" "Over 50,000 views already," Mrs. Henderson interrupted, beaming with proxy pride. "The comments are full of people asking where they can get one of your dolls. Sarah's nanny posted it, apparently, though she didn't realize who Sarah was at the time. Quite a stir it's causing at Hayes Toys, from what I hear." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't considered that his simple act of kindness might find its way onto social media. "Hayes Toys? The big company downtown?" Mrs. Henderson nodded sagely. "The very same. And that little girl you helped, that was Sarah Hayes, Eleanor Hayes's daughter, the CEO's only child." She touched the screen, scrolling through comments. "Listen to this one. In an age of mass production and plastic toys, this is what we're missing: heart, soul, and true craftsmanship." The bell chimed again, this time announcing Jimmy from the coffee shop. He burst in with unusual energy, his own phone in hand. "Mr. Miller, have you seen? You've gone viral." Thomas sank onto his workstool, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "I just wanted to help a crying child," he murmured, watching as Jimmy and Mrs. Henderson compared notes on view counts and shares. "That's exactly why people are responding," Jimmy insisted. "Dad says he's had customers all morning talking about it. The way you worked with her, taught her about creating something new from loss. People are saying it's like watching a masterclass in both craftsmanship and compassion." More customers began trickling in, each with their own version of the video, their own comments about its impact. Thomas listened with growing amazement as they shared stories of other viewers' responses. Parents lamenting the loss of handcrafted toys, grandparents reminiscing about treasured dolls from their own childhoods, artisans celebrating the preservation, of traditional craftsmanship. By early afternoon, his usually quiet workshop had become a hub of activity. Regular customers mingled with curious newcomers, all wanting to see where the magical doll had been created. Thomas found himself explaining his techniques over and over, showing off his father's tools, demonstrating how he chose woods and fabrics. "But surely you must have other dolls for sale," one elegantly dressed woman pressed, her eyes scanning the workshop's shelves. With this kind of demand, Thomas shook his head. Grace was special, made for a specific child in a specific moment. "I've never mass-produced anything. Each piece I work on is unique, meant to carry its own story." The woman's face fell slightly, but then brightened. "Perhaps you could teach others? Share your knowledge? There's such a hunger for this kind of authentic craftsmanship." Before Thomas could respond, a new wave of murmurs swept through the workshop. Through the windows, they could see a sleek black car pulling up outside. The driver emerged first, then opened the rear door with practiced precision. Eleanor Hayes stepped onto the sidewalk, her presence commanding immediate attention. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Thomas's entire workshop, but it was her expression that caught his eye, a mixture of determination and something softer, more personal. The workshop fell silent as she entered, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Thomas stood, suddenly very aware of his dusty apron and the sawdust in his hair. But before he could speak, she did something unexpected. She smiled, warm and genuine. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending her hand. "I believe you've met my daughter Sarah. She hasn't stopped talking about Grace since yesterday. In fact, she insisted on bringing her to show all her teachers today, quite against school policy. But somehow, Grace managed to charm her way into every classroom." Thomas shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip despite her elegant appearance. "Sarah is a very special young lady," he replied carefully. "I'm glad Grace could bring her some comfort." Eleanor's eyes swept the workshop, taking in the worn tools, the carefully organized workbench, the projects waiting for his attention. "You've created something extraordinary, Mr. Miller. Not just the doll itself, but the entire experience. The way you turned my daughter's tears into wonder, how you taught her about healing through creativity." She paused, her expression growing more intent. "I'd very much like to discuss a proposal with you, if you have a moment." The workshop had grown so quiet, you could hear the old clock ticking in the corner. Mrs. Henderson and Jimmy exchanged meaningful glances, while the other customers tried to look busy examining various antiques. "Perhaps we could step into my office," Thomas offered, gesturing to the small room behind the workshop where he kept his books and records. "Though I should warn you, it's nothing like corporate headquarters." Eleanor's smile widened slightly. "After watching that video a dozen times this morning, Mr. Miller, I'm far more interested in your workshop's authenticity than any corporate polish." She followed him toward the office, then turned back to address the curious onlookers. "Would you all mind giving us a few minutes? I believe Mr. Miller and I have some important matters to discuss about the future of toy-making in America." As Thomas led her into his modest office, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change dramatically. But looking at his father's old toolbox on the shelf, he heard Margaret's voice in his memory. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the smallest acts of kindness." He straightened his shoulders and prepared to hear what Eleanor Hayes had to say. Thomas's office was barely large enough for 2 chairs and the ancient oak desk he'd restored 20 years ago. Afternoon light filtered through the single window, illuminating decades of receipts, repair logs, and carefully preserved thank you notes from satisfied customers. Eleanor Hayes settled into the visitor's chair with unexpected grace, her eyes drawn to a framed photograph on the wall. Thomas and Margaret on their wedding day, standing proudly in front of the workshop. "Your wife?" Eleanor asked softly, noting how the woman in the photo beamed at the camera, her hand resting on a beautifully carved rocking chair. "Margaret?" Thomas nodded, easing into his own chair. "She passed 5 years ago. That chair was our wedding present to each other. We restored it together." He smiled at the memory. She always said every piece of furniture had a soul if you just took the time to find it. She sounds like a wise woman. Eleanor's professional demeanor softened slightly. I lost my mother 2 years ago, Sarah's grandmother. The one who gave her Clara the porcelain doll. She paused, her fingers absently touching a locket at her throat. When I saw that video this morning, saw how you helped Sarah transform her loss into something new and beautiful. Mr. Miller, you did more than just make a doll. Thomas shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with praise. I just did what felt right. Every child deserves to have something special to hold on to. Exactly. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes bright with purpose. That's precisely why I'm here. Hayes Toys has been struggling lately, not financially but spiritually. We've become so focused on mass production, on quarterly profits and market share, that we've lost something essential. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a tablet, pulling up a series of images. These are our best-selling dolls from the past year. Thomas looked at the screen, seeing row after row of identical plastic faces, each with the same manufactured smile, the same machine-stamped features. They're very uniform, he offered diplomatically. They're soulless, Eleanor corrected firmly. Safe, certifiably non-toxic, and completely devoid of the magic that made your grace come alive in Sarah's hands. She set the tablet aside. Last month, we had to recall 2 million units due to safety concerns. But watching Sarah with Grace, seeing how carefully you considered every aspect of the doll's construction, Mr. Miller, I believe you could help us rediscover what we've lost. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Mrs. Hayes, I'm just a small-town repairman. I work with my hands, one piece at a time. I wouldn't know the first thing about corporate toy production. That's exactly why we need you. Eleanor's voice grew passionate. We don't want you to adapt to our world. We want to learn from yours. That video of you and Sarah has resonated with people because it represents everything we've forgotten about toy making. The personal connection, the craft, the love that goes into creating something unique. She pulled out a business card, setting it carefully on the desk. The Hayes Toys logo gleamed in gold leaf against cream cardstock. I'm offering you a position as our master craftsman and creative director. You'd have your own workshop, larger than this one, with all the tools and materials you could want. But more importantly, you'd help us develop a new line of handcrafted toys, train other artisans in your methods, and bring back the kind of quality that made people treasure their toys for generations. Thomas picked up the card, its weight substantial, in his fingers. And what about this place? These people depend on me for repairs. Eleanor smiled. Keep it. Run it exactly as you always have. We'll work around your schedule here. What I'm offering is an opportunity to expand your impact, to share your gift with children who may never have experienced the kind of magic you created for Sarah. The clock in the corner ticked steadily as Thomas considered her words. Through the office door, he could hear the murmur of voices in the workshop, his regular customers, probably speculating about this unexpected meeting. He thought about Grace, about the joy in Sarah's eyes when she first held the doll. How many other children could experience that same wonder? I'd need to do it my way, he said slowly. No rushing, no cutting corners. Each piece would have to have its own character, its own story. That's exactly what we want, Eleanor assured him. We're calling it the Heritage Collection. Limited edition, handcrafted toys that parents can pass down to their children, just like Clara was passed down to Sarah. She hesitated, then added more softly, My mother would have loved this. She always said modern toys had lost their hearts. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at his beloved workshop. Sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air, just as it had on countless other afternoons. But something felt different now, a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. There's something else you should see, Eleanor said, reaching once more into her briefcase. She withdrew a stack of papers, printouts of comments from the viral video. These are from all over the world. Parents, grandparents, craftsmen, teachers, they're all saying the same thing. We need this. We need to bring back the magic of toys that are made with love and skill. Thomas read through the comments, his heart warming at the sincerity in them. One in particular caught his eye. Watching this man work reminded me of my grandfather's workshop. For just a moment, I could smell the wood shavings and hear his voice teaching me about patience and craft. We've lost so much in our rush for progress. Please, let's bring this back. He turned back to Eleanor, his decision made. I'll need to keep my regular hours here at the shop, and I want to start small, quality over quantity. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Eleanor stood, extending her hand. Mr. Miller, that's exactly what we want. When can you start? As they shook hands, the workshop bell chimed again. Through the office door, they heard a familiar voice. Mr. Miller, Grace wanted to say hello before my afternoon lessons. Eleanor's eyes met Thomas's, sharing a moment of perfect understanding. Shall we go tell Sarah she's about to become our first toy tester? She asked, her professional facade giving way to genuine excitement. Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. A craftsman couldn't ask for a better critic, he agreed, opening the office door to face whatever new adventures awaited in his workshop filled with possibility. Sarah burst into the workshop with Grace held carefully in her arms, the doll's silver bell chiming softly with each step. She stopped short at the sight of her mother, surprise flickering across her face. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Eleanor knelt down to her daughter's level, something Thomas suspected she didn't do often in her corporate attire. "I saw the beautiful doll Mr. Miller made for you," she said, gently touching Grace's maplewood cheek. "And I thought maybe other children might like to have something this special too." Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean Mr. Miller could make more dolls? Like Grace?" "Not exactly like Grace," Thomas interjected quietly, moving to stand beside his workbench. "Each one would be different, with its own personality, just like people are all different." The workshop had grown crowded again, regular customers and curious onlookers drawn back in by Sarah's arrival. Mrs. Henderson beamed from her usual spot near the window, while Jimmy lingered by the door, all pretense of delivering coffee forgotten. "That's precisely why we need Mr. Miller's help," Eleanor explained, standing and smoothing her skirt. "Hayes Toys has forgotten something important. Something you helped us remember, Sarah, when you showed everyone how special Grace is." Thomas picked up his father's toolbox, its worn leather familiar under his fingers. "Your mother has asked me to help create a new kind of toy," he told Sarah. "Something that combines old-fashioned craftsmanship with modern safety standards. But I'll need an expert consultant, someone who understands what makes Grace so special." Sarah clutched her doll closer. "Me?" Eleanor smiled. "Who better? After all, you're the one who gave Grace her name, who understood exactly what Mr. Miller was trying to create." Thomas opened his toolbox, withdrawing a small piece of maple wood, a sister piece to the one he'd used for Grace. "Would you like to help me design the next one? Show me what you think other children might love." Sarah's face lit up with joy, but then she paused, looking thoughtful. "But each one has to have its own story, right? Like how Grace has grandmother's pearl buttons and your special bell." "Exactly right," Thomas agreed, feeling a surge of pride at her understanding. "Every piece we create will carry its own history, its own magic. That's what your mother wants to bring back to Hayes Toys." Eleanor withdrew another business card from her pocket, this one printed on shimming paper that caught the light like mother of pearl. "We'll call it the Heritage Collection," she announced to the gathered crowd. "Handcrafted toys designed under Mr. Miller's guidance. Each one unique, each one made to be treasured and passed down through generations." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the workshop. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Jimmy was already typing excitedly on his phone, no doubt sharing the news with his social media followers. "When do we start?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Thomas exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. "How about right now?" he suggested, pulling up a stool to his workbench. "Show me how Grace likes to dance, and we'll see what inspiration comes to us." As Sarah carefully demonstrated Grace's movements, the silver bell creating a delicate symphony, Thomas saw his workshop with new eyes. The walls that had witnessed countless repairs and restorations would now see the birth of new creations. His father's tools, passed down with love and wisdom, would help shape joy for a new generation of children. Eleanor stood quietly observing, her corporate polish softened by the wonder in her daughter's eyes. "We'll need to draw up contracts," she said softly to Thomas, "set up schedules, discuss logistics. But for now," she gestured to Sarah, who was showing Grace's pearl buttons to an enraptured Mrs. Henderson, "for now, let's just watch the magic begin." Thomas nodded, already reaching for his sketchbook. In his mind, new designs were taking shape. Dolls and toys that would carry forward the traditions of craftsmanship while embracing the possibilities of the future. "Sometimes," he said, remembering Margaret's words, "the best new chapters start with a single act of kindness." The afternoon sun painted the workshop in warm gold, dust motes dancing like dreams taking flight, while the silver bell's gentle chime seemed to herald the beginning of something extraordinary. Later that evening, after the excitement had died down and the workshop had emptied of visitors, Thomas sat alone in his father's old chair. The contract Eleanor had left lay unopened on his workbench, its cream-colored envelope gleaming in the lamplight. Above him, Margaret's photograph seemed to watch with knowing eyes, her smile holding secrets he wished he could unlock. "What would you say about all this, love?" he murmured, running his fingers over the worn arms of the chair they'd restored together. The wood had darkened over the years from countless touches, carrying the patina of time and love that no mass produced. Peace could ever match. He stood and walked to the wall of photographs, each one a chapter in his life story. His father teaching him to use a lathe, his mother's proud smile at his first solo repair, Margaret on their wedding day, the two of them standing before the workshop when they'd finally paid off the mortgage. So many memories, all centered around this space, this calling. The phone on his desk buzzed. A text from his nephew Michael, who had seen the viral video. "Uncle Tom, Mom's crying happy tears watching this. She says Dad would be so proud. Call when you can." Thomas picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside lay an opportunity he'd never imagined, a chance to share his craft with the world, to teach others the values his father had instilled in him. But with it came responsibility, expectations, deadlines. Could he maintain the soul of his work under corporate pressure? He reached for his father's toolbox, opening it with reverent care. The familiar scent of wood oil and leather rose up, carrying with it echoes of his father's voice. "Never rush craftsmanship, son. Every piece deserves the time it needs to become what it's meant to be." From the bottom compartment, he withdrew a small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. Inside lay his father's final project, an unfinished carved bird, its wings half emerged from the cherry wood. His father had started it the week before his stroke, saying he'd finally found the perfect piece of wood to capture a cardinal in flight. "I never finished it," Thomas said softly to the empty workshop. "Couldn't bring myself to, felt wrong somehow, like I'd be overwriting your last touches." But now, holding the unfinished carving, he saw it differently. Perhaps some works were meant to be continued, meant to evolve through different hands while keeping their original heart. Wasn't that what Eleanor was offering? A chance to pass on not just techniques, but values. He set the bird on his workbench. Beside Grace's sketches, in the lamp's warm glow, the half-carved wings seemed to quiver with potential, ready to take flight after all these years. Thomas touched the rough edges where his father's work had stopped, feeling the promise in the untouched wood. "It's scary, isn't it?" he remembered Margaret saying, when they'd considered expanding the workshop years ago. But sometimes the best things in life wait on the other side of fear. Moving with sudden purpose, Thomas reached for his sketchbook. On a fresh page, he began to draw, not toys or dolls, but a vision of what his new workshop space could be. A place where craftsmanship met innovation, where traditional tools sat comfortably beside modern safety equipment, where apprentices could learn the soul of woodworking while embracing new possibilities. He sketched until the lamp's light grew dim, filling pages with ideas that bridged past and future. When he finally set down his pencil, the workshop felt different, not an ending, but a continuation. His father had taught him craftsmanship. Margaret had taught him heart. Now it was his turn to teach, to pass on these gifts to a new generation. Thomas picked up the envelope, breaking the seal with steady hands. As he read through Eleanor's proposal, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest, the same warmth he'd seen in Sarah's eyes when she first held Grace. Some things were meant to grow beyond their beginnings while keeping their core truth intact. He reached for his phone to call his sister, but first he picked up his father's unfinished cardinal. Tomorrow, he decided, he would bring it. To the meeting with Eleanor. It would be his first lesson in the new workshop, how to honor what came before while creating something new. The cardinal's half-carved wings caught the light, no longer a testament to loss, but a promise of flight to come. Monday morning found Thomas standing before the Hayes Toys headquarters, his father's toolbox in one hand and the unfinished cardinal carefully wrapped in his pocket. The building rose before him in gleaming steel and glass, a far cry from his weathered workshop, but he drew comfort from the weight of his tools, each one carrying decades of wisdom in its worn handles. The security guard at the desk did a double take when Thomas gave his name. "You're the doll maker," the man asked, his stern expression softening. "My granddaughter hasn't stopped talking about that video. She says it reminded her of magic." Thomas smiled, accepting his visitor's badge. "Sometimes the oldest magic is the simplest, just hands and heart working together." The guard nodded, directing him to the executive elevator with more warmth than he showed the suited executives hurrying past. Eleanor met him on the top floor, dressed impeccably as before, but with an excited energy that belied her corporate demeanor. "Perfect timing," she said, leading him down a corridor lined with display cases, showing Hayes Toys' evolution through the years. "There's someone I want you to meet first." They turned a corner, and Thomas stopped short. Through a wall of windows, he saw a space that took his breath away. The room was vast, with soaring ceilings and natural light pouring in from skylights. Workbenches of solid oak lined the walls, their surfaces pristine and waiting. Tools, both traditional and modern, hung in perfect organization, and shelves of carefully selected woods gleamed with potential. But what caught his eye was the figure standing in the center, Sarah, wearing a child-sized apron emblazoned with "Official Toy Tester" and holding Grace with careful pride. "I hope you don't mind," Eleanor said softly. "She insisted on being here for your first day. Said Grace wanted to help show you around your new workshop." Thomas set his toolbox down, on the nearest bench taking in the space. Someone had clearly paid attention to detail, the height of the benches, the angle of the light, even the subtle ventilation system that would keep the air clear of dust while maintaining the proper humidity for working wood. "Over here, Mr. Miller," Sarah called, pulling him toward a special corner of the room. "Look what Mom had them make." It was a smaller workspace, sized perfectly for teaching children. The tools were appropriately sized and safety-proofed, the bench at just the right height for young apprentices. Above it hung a sign in elegant script, "Where magic begins." "We thought," Eleanor explained, "that part of the heritage collection could include workshops, teaching children about craftsmanship, letting them experience the joy of creating something with their own hands." Thomas reached into his pocket, withdrawing his father's unfinished cardinal. He placed it carefully on the teaching bench, its half-carved wings catching the morning light. "Then this is where we'll start," he said, "with a lesson about how some things take time to become what they're meant to be." Sarah approached the carving with reverent curiosity. "It's not finished," she observed. "No," Thomas agreed. "My father started it, but never had the chance to complete it. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. Would you like to help me finish it?" The girl's eyes widened. Really? But what if I make a mistake? Thomas opened his toolbox, withdrawing his father's smallest carving knife. That's lesson number 1. In true craftsmanship, there are no mistakes, only opportunities to create something unexpected and beautiful. Eleanor watched them from the doorway, her business persona momentarily forgotten. The board meets in an hour to discuss the Heritage Collection launch, she said. But I think they should see this first. A master craftsman passing on his knowledge to the next generation. This is exactly what Hayes Toys needs. As Thomas began showing Sarah how to hold the carving knife safely, explaining how to read the wood's grain, he felt a familiar presence, his father's wisdom in his words, Margaret's love in his patience, and his own joy in sharing the craft that had shaped his life. The cardinal's unfinished wings seemed to flutter in the workshop's new light, no longer a symbol of what was left undone, but a promise of what was yet to begin. The sleek tablet computer sat incongruously beside Thomas's worn toolbox, its screen displaying a dizzying array of safety regulations and production schedules. After 2 weeks at Hayes Toys, he was still struggling to navigate the corporate landscape of deadlines, metrics, and digital documentation. Just tap the workflow icon. Jeremy, his assigned technical advisor, explained for the 3rd time that morning. The young man's patience seemed infinite, though Thomas caught the occasional flicker of friendly amusement in his eyes. All your designs need to be logged in the system before we can begin safety testing. Thomas sighed, his calloused fingers feeling clumsy on the smooth screen. In my day, the only testing we needed was a child's smile. He glanced at the prototype doll lying on his workbench, a gentle-faced creation with hair of autumn-colored wool and eyes of carefully polished tiger's eye stones. That's why we need you, Jeremy said, pulling up another screen. Look at these numbers from our focus groups. Parents are overwhelmed by mass-produced toys, hungry for something authentic, but they also want guarantees of safety, durability, documentation of materials. The morning light streamed through the workshop windows, catching the tiger's eye stones and making them seem to wink. Thomas picked up the doll, feeling the smooth wooden joints he'd crafted with the same care he'd given Grace. Can't we just let the work speak for itself? In here, yes. Jeremy gestured to the workshop, where 3 apprentice craftspeople were carefully learning to shape wood under Thomas's guidance. But out there, we need to speak the language of modern commerce, while keeping the soul of traditional craftsmanship. A gentle chime interrupted them, Sarah's designated signal. She bounded into the workshop, Grace in one arm and her school tablet in the other. Mr. Miller, I did a presentation about traditional toy-making for my class. Her eyes shone with excitement. Everyone wanted to know when they could buy a doll like Grace. Thomas smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. Well now, that's perfect timing. Would you like to help us test our newest creation? He held out the tiger's eye doll. Sarah carefully set Grace on her special stand and accepted the new doll. With reverent hands, she feels different, but good different. Her fingers found the smooth joints, exploring how they moved. Like she's waiting to tell me her story. Jeremy watched the interaction with keen interest, his tablet forgotten. This was what Eleanor had hired Thomas for, not just craftsmanship, but the magic that happened when a child first connected with a handmade toy. The wood is maple, like Grace, Thomas explained, but see how the grain patterns are unique. No 2 dolls will ever be exactly alike. Sarah nodded seriously, because they're like people. Everyone has their own special pattern inside. Jeremy's fingers flew across his tablet. That's it. That's our marketing angle, as unique as your child's imagination. We can create a system where each doll comes with documentation of its unique materials, the craftsperson who made it, even the story of where the wood came from. Thomas frowned slightly. Seems like a lot of extra steps between making and giving, but don't you see? Sarah piped up, surprising them both. It's like how you told me about Grace's bell and grandmother's pearl buttons. Every part has a story. Now we can share those stories with everyone. Thomas looked at the girl with newfound appreciation. In just a few weeks, she'd grasped something he was still learning, that adaptation didn't have to mean losing tradition's heart. He picked up his tablet with fresh determination. "All right, Jeremy, show me again how to log these materials. But we do it my way, not just specifications, but the story of each piece. How this maple came from a fallen tree in Winston Park. How these tiger's eye stones were chosen for their particular warmth." Jeremy grinned, already creating a new template. "That's exactly what Eleanor hoped you'd bring to Hayes Toys, the humanity behind the craftsmanship." As they worked, Sarah sat in her corner of the workshop, getting to know the new doll. Thomas heard her whispering, sharing secrets with both Grace and the unnamed tiger's eye creation, weaving them into her world with a child's perfect intuition. Perhaps, he thought, this new chapter wasn't about choosing between old and new, but about building bridges between them. One doll, one story, one carefully carved piece at a time. The failed prototype lay on Eleanor's desk like an accusation. Its joints, meant to mirror Thomas's hand-carved precision, had been manufactured to exact specifications, but something had gone terribly wrong in the translation from workshop to factory. The wood felt dead, the movement stiff, and the eyes, mass-produced versions of his tiger's eye stones, stared blankly without a hint of the warmth he'd carefully crafted into each original. "The safety tests failed," Eleanor said quietly. Her usual confidence dimmed. The joints showed stress fractures under standard testing, and the focus group, she slid a report across the desk. The parents said it felt soulless. One child asked why the doll looked sad. Thomas picked up the prototype, his heart heavy. The production team had insisted on streamlining his design for larger-scale manufacturing. Gone were the subtle variations in the wood grain that made each piece unique. Gone was the careful selection of materials that gave each doll its character. In their place was efficiency, uniformity, and failure. "Maybe we were wrong," he said, placing the doll back on the desk. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be scaled." Up, the door opened and Sarah slipped in, immediately sensing the tension. She carried Grace, as always, but also the tiger's eye doll, now named Aurora by popular vote among the workshop apprentices. "Mum, Mr. Miller, what's wrong?" Eleanor started to suggest Sarah wait outside, but Thomas shook his head. "No, let her stay. She's been our best critic from the start." He gestured to the prototype. "What do you think of this one, Sarah?" The girl approached the desk carefully, setting Grace and Aurora aside to pick up the prototype. Her face fell almost immediately. "Oh," she said softly, "she's lonely." "Lonely?" Eleanor leaned forward. "What do you mean? She doesn't have any stories in her," Sarah explained, running her fingers over the machine-perfect joints. "When Mr. Miller makes dolls, you can feel all the stories in the wood, in the special things he chooses for them. This one," she set the doll down gently, "it's like she's forgotten who she was supposed to be." Thomas felt something shift in his mind, a solution taking shape. "The wood remembers," he murmured, remembering his father's words. "Every piece carries its own history, its own character. We've been trying to erase that, to make every piece identical." He stood and began pacing, energy returning to his movements. "We're approaching this backward, instead of trying to make the manufacturing match the handcrafting. We need to let the manufacturing serve the craftsmanship." Eleanor watched him intently. "What are you suggesting?" "A hybrid approach." Thomas picked up Aurora, demonstrating her smooth, natural movements. "We use modern manufacturing for the basic structure, the internal mechanisms, the safety components, but the soul of each doll, the wood selection, the final shaping, the special elements that make it unique, that stays handcrafted." "But the cost," Eleanor began. "Will be justified by the value," Thomas finished. "These aren't meant to compete with mass-market toys. They're meant to become heirlooms, like Clara was for Sarah, each one signed by its craftsperson with a story as unique as the child who receives it." Sarah had been listening intently. "Like how Grace has your special bell, and Aurora has her tiger's eye eyes that change color in different light." "Exactly." Thomas turned to Eleanor. We've been so focused on replicating the craftsmanship that we forgot why it matters. It's not about making identical pieces. It's about creating something unique for each child. Eleanor picked up the prototype, then looked at Grace and Aurora. The difference was stark, not just in quality, but in character. "The board won't like the reduced production numbers," she said slowly. "But if we market these as true collector's pieces, each one certified, unique, each one with its own story," Sarah added firmly. Thomas felt the tension in his shoulders ease. "We start over, build a proper training program for craftspeople, use modern technology to ensure safety and durability, but keep the soul of traditional woodworking. It'll take longer, cost more, but it'll be right," Eleanor finished. She stood, decision made. "I'll call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Sarah, would you be willing to bring Grace and Aurora? I think the board needs to see the difference for themselves." As Sarah nodded enthusiastically, Thomas picked up the failed prototype one last time. Even failures had their purpose, he realized. Sometimes you needed to take a wrong turn to find the true path. Early the next morning, before the board meeting, Thomas sat in his original workshop, his father's old carpentry journal open before him. The leather-bound book's pages were yellowed with age, filled with careful notes, drawings and wisdom, gathered over decades. He'd brought Sarah and Eleanor here for a purpose, to remind them all where the magic truly began. "Your workshop smells different from the new one," Sarah observed, settled in her usual spot by the workbench. "Like stories and secrets." "That's time you're smelling," Thomas smiled, turning another page in the journal. "Can't manufacture that?" He paused at a particular entry, his father's precise handwriting filling the page. "The wood tells you what it wants to be. Our job is to listen, not dictate." Eleanor, looking somewhat out of place in her business suit among the sawdust and aged tools, leaned in to read. "Is this where you learned to make grace?" "In a way." Thomas ran his fingers over the weathered page. "My father taught me that craftsmanship isn't about forcing materials into a predetermined shape. It's about discovering what's already there, waiting to emerge." He stood and walked to a shelf, retrieving a piece of maple wood he'd been saving. "Watch this," he said, placing it on the workbench. From his toolbox, he withdrew a small knife and began to gently scrape away the surface layer. As the shavings fell away, a pattern emerged in the grain, swirls and lines that seemed to form a face, smiling up at them. Sarah gasped. "It's like it was hiding in there." "Exactly." Thomas set down the knife. "Every piece of wood is unique, the grain, the density, even the sound it makes when you tap it. They're all part of its character. We've been trying to standardize something that's naturally diverse." Eleanor touched the revealed face in the wood grain. "But how do we translate this into a viable business model? The board needs numbers, projections." Thomas pulled out his father's journal again, flipping to the back where he'd recently added his own notes. "What if we turned the uniqueness into our strength? Instead of fighting it, we celebrate it." He spread out several sketches he'd made during the night. "Look, we create a basic framework, yes, tested and certified for safety. But then we let each craftsperson work with the natural characteristics of their materials. Every doll becomes a collaboration between artisan and wood, between tradition and innovation." Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Like how you knew Grace needed your special bell and Aurora needed her tiger's eyes that change color." "Precisely." Thomas pulled out another piece of wood, this one darker with striking grain patterns. "See these lines? They might become flowing hair, or perhaps the folds of a dress. The wood suggests possibilities. We just have to be willing to see them." Eleanor had been taking notes on her tablet, but now she set it aside, really looking at the workshop around her. "This is what we lost," she said softly. "Not just the craftsmanship, but the relationship with the materials, the understanding. That imperfection can be beautiful." Thomas nodded, reaching for his father's oldest chisel. "Let me show you something before the board meeting." He began to work the wood, his movements sure and precise. As he carved, he explained his vision. We train our craftspeople not just in technique, but in observation. Teach them to read the wood, understand its properties. Each doll becomes a story told in collaboration with the material itself. Tiny shavings fell as a form began to emerge. Yes, it takes longer. Yes, it costs more. But what we're really selling isn't just toys. It's the wisdom of generations, the beauty of natural materials, the joy of owning something truly unique. Sarah watched intently as features began to appear in the wood. It's like magic, she whispered. The oldest kind, Thomas agreed. The magic of patience, skill, and respect for the materials. He looked at Eleanor. That's what Hayes Toys can offer that no other company can. Not just products, but a connection to something timeless. Eleanor picked up the failed prototype she'd brought with them, really seeing now what it lacked. We'll need to completely restructure our production model, retrain our entire workforce, create new quality standards that celebrate uniqueness instead of uniformity. Yes, Thomas said simply, continuing to carve. But look what we gain. Under his hands, the wood was coming alive, telling its own story through his tools. Sarah and Eleanor watched in silence as another unique character emerged, ready to become part of a child's world. In his father's journal, still open on the bench, the aged pages held both the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future. Sometimes, Thomas realized, you had to go back to basics to find the way forward. The Hayes Toys boardroom felt a world away from Thomas's workshop, all chrome and glass and stern faces around a massive mahogany table. But Thomas had brought pieces of his world with him. Grace and Aurora sat centerpiece on the polished surface, while the failed prototype lay beside them. Most importantly, he'd brought his father's journal and the piece he'd carved that morning, still unfinished, deliberately so. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, commanding attention in her executive role. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday I showed you our failed prototype and the concerning test results. Today, I'm showing you our future. She nodded to Thomas, who stepped forward, his work-worn hands steady as he lifted Grace. This is where it began, he said, his voice quiet but carrying conviction. One doll, made for one child, created from materials chosen for their character, not their uniformity. A board member, Johnson, according to his nameplate, adjusted his glasses. We've seen the viral video, Mr. Miller. Charming story, but hardly a sustainable business model. Our shareholders expect growth, Thomas interrupted gently. Progress? Let me show you something. He set Grace down and picked up his father's journal, opening it to a marked page. My father wrote this 40 years ago. Mass production seeks to eliminate variables. True craftsmanship celebrates them. He placed the unfinished carving on the table. This morning, I started this piece. Notice how the grain naturally suggests features, the curve of a smile, the flow of hair. Each piece of wood has its own character, its own story, waiting to be revealed. Sarah, who had been waiting quietly by the door, stepped forward right on cue. She carried a large tablet, displaying a sophisticated presentation that Jeremy had helped prepare. May I show them, Mr. Miller? The board member's expression softened slightly at her presence. Thomas nodded encouragingly. This is what happens when we try to make everything the same, Sarah said, bringing up images of the failed prototype stress tests. Then she switched to a new slide, showing Grace and Aurora. And this is what happens when we let each doll be unique. Thomas picked up the thread. We've been approaching this backward. Instead of trying to standardize the craftsmanship, we need to standardize the elements that ensure safety, while celebrating the unique characteristics of each piece. He laid out his vision, supported by Jeremy's careful market research displayed on Sarah's tablet. A hybrid approach, modern manufacturing for internal mechanisms and safety components, combined with traditional craftsmanship for the elements that give each doll its character. Eleanor advanced to the financial projections. Yes, production numbers would be lower, unit costs higher, but market research shows parents are willing to pay premium prices for genuine artisanal toys. We're not just selling dolls, we're selling heirlooms. Each piece documented, Thomas continued, demonstrating the digital certification system Jeremy had developed. The wood's origin, the craftsperson's signature, the unique elements that make it special. Modern technology supporting traditional craftsmanship, Johnson frowned. The training costs alone are an investment in our future, Eleanor cut in. We're not just creating products, we're creating master craftspeople. Each artisan we train becomes part of Hayes Toys' legacy. Thomas reached for his father's journal again. When I apprenticed with my father, he taught me that rushing craftsmanship serves no one. The same principle applies here. We take the time to do it right, to create something meaningful. Sarah stepped forward again, holding Grace. My grandmother gave me a doll before she died, she said softly. It was special because it had a story. When it broke, I thought I'd lost that story forever. But Mr. Miller showed me that we can create new stories, ones that last. The boardroom fell silent. Thomas watched as Grace and Aurora were passed carefully around the table, each board member noting the subtle differences, the warmth of the wood, the personality evident in every detail. Finally, the board chairman spoke. It goes against every modern manufacturing principle, he said slowly. Limited production, higher costs, intensive training requirements. He paused, running his finger along Aurora's perfectly smooth joint. And yet, I haven't felt craftsmanship like this since my grandfather's wooden train set. He looked at Eleanor. You're betting the company's future on a return to its roots. Eleanor stood straight, confident. I'm betting on the timeless appeal of things made with genuine care and skill, on parents' desire to give their children something real in an increasingly virtual world. The chairman picked up Thomas's unfinished carving, studying how the natural grain guided the emerging features. Show me the implementation timeline, he said finally. And, Mr. Miller, I believe I'd like to commission a doll for my granddaughter. Thomas smiled, feeling the weight of possibility in the room. Sometimes the future needed to be carved slowly, carefully, one piece at a time. The video playing on the workshop's new display screen showed children from around the world unboxing their Heritage Collection dolls. Each reaction captured the same moment of wonder Thomas had first seen in Sarah's eyes. That magical instant, when a child recognized they were holding something extraordinary. Look at these numbers, Jeremy said, scrolling through analytics on his tablet. The waiting list is 6 months long, and we've had inquiry calls from museums about including the dolls in their contemporary craft exhibitions. Thomas stood at his workbench, watching his apprentices guide their own students through the basics of wood selection. The workshop had expanded, yet somehow maintained its soul. Tools old and new coexisting in harmonious purpose, the scent of wood shavings mingling with the gentle hum of modern safety equipment. Mr. Miller, Sarah burst in, waving a tablet. We're trending again. Someone posted a side-by-side comparison of mass-produced dolls in our Heritage Collection. People are calling it the Soul of Toys movement. The video showed a child's hands, comparing the rigid movements of a plastic doll with the natural grace of one of their creations. The difference was striking, not just in materials, but in the very essence of how they moved, how they invited play and imagination. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, looking both professional and pleasantly overwhelmed. The morning shows all. Want interviews? They're calling it a revolution in toy-making. She smiled. Though I think Renaissance might be more accurate. A return to what matters most. Thomas picked up his latest creation. A doll crafted from cherry wood that had weathered a lightning strike, its grain showing remarkable patterns that he'd incorporated into the design. Each Heritage Collection piece told its own story, from the carefully sourced materials to the artisan's personal touches. Have you seen the letters? Sarah asked, pulling up another folder on her tablet. Children are writing to their dolls makers, sharing their stories. Look at this one. Dear Mr. Thompson, my Aurora helps me be brave during thunderstorms because you used wood from a tree that survived lightning. The apprentices had gathered around, their own works in progress held carefully in their hands. Each had learned not just technique, but philosophy. The importance of listening to the materials, of finding the story within each piece, of taking the time to do things right. The investment community is taking notice too, Eleanor added. Our stock price has doubled since the launch. Turns out there's a significant market for authenticity in an age of mass production. Thomas nodded, remembering his father's words about variables and craftsmanship. The Heritage Collection had proved that uniqueness wasn't a flaw to be engineered away, but a feature to be celebrated. Each doll came with its own digital certificate detailing its material's origin, its craftsperson's journey, and the special elements that made it one of a kind. We've had an interesting request, Eleanor continued, pulling out her own tablet. The National Museum of American Innovation wants to create an exhibit about the merger of traditional craftsmanship and modern technology. They'd like to feature the Heritage Collection as a case study in sustainable artisanal manufacturing. Sarah, who had appointed herself unofficial archive keeper, was already documenting everything for the exhibition. We should show them your father's journal, Mr. Miller, and the first tools you used for Grace. Speaking of Grace, Thomas said, glancing at the special display case where the original doll sat alongside Aurora. She's about to have a new sister. He gestured to his workbench, where a half-finished doll lay waiting. This one speaking to me about autumn winds and harvest moons. The workshop had become more than just a production space. It was a learning center, a place where tradition and innovation danced together in harmony. Children would come on tours, watching wide-eyed as craftspeople transformed simple wood into magical companions. Adults would stand in respectful silence, reminded of toys from their own childhoods, of things made to last. "Oh!" Sarah exclaimed, reading another message. "Listen to this one. Dear Hayes Toys, my daughter has autism and finds most toys overwhelming. But her heritage doll, with its smooth wood and gentle movements, has become her closest friend. Thank you for making toys with soul." Thomas felt his throat tighten. He looked around the workshop, at the apprentices teaching their students, at Sarah documenting everything with careful attention, at Eleanor balancing corporate success with artistic integrity. This was what his father had meant about craftsmanship celebrating variables. Every piece unique, every doll a testimony to the beauty of imperfection, every creation carrying forward the wisdom of generations. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the grain of dozens of works in progress, each waiting to become part of a child's story. In the corner, Grace's silver bell chimed softly in the breeze, a reminder of where it all began, with one man, one child, and the timeless magic of creating something real. 1 year to the day after Thomas had first made Grace, the Hayes Toys Heritage Workshop was hosting its first graduation ceremony. The newly renovated space, a perfect blend of traditional workshop and modern facility, was filled with proud families watching as the first class of artisan apprentices received their certifications. Thomas stood at his specially designed teaching bench, his father's toolbox open beside him. Each graduate would receive a tool from his personal collection, carefully chosen to match their particular strengths and style. But more importantly, they would carry forward the philosophy that had transformed Hayes Toys from the inside out. "When I first started this journey," Thomas addressed the gathering, "I thought I was just helping one child with a broken doll. But what we've created here goes beyond toys. We've rebuilt something that was in danger of being lost. The connection between maker and material, between craft and story, between generations." Eleanor, seated in the front row with Sarah, nodded in agreement. Hayes Toys had been transformed. While their standard production lines still ran, the Heritage Collection had become the company's crown jewel, their waiting list growing despite the premium prices. More importantly, it had changed how they approached all their toy making, bringing elements of craftsmanship and thoughtful design even to their regular lines. Each of you, Thomas continued, looking at his graduates, has learned more than just woodworking. You've learned to listen to the materials, to find the story in each piece, to create something that carries meaning forward through time. He gestured to the wall where Grace and Aurora now sat in a special display case, alongside other notable creations from the past year. These aren't just dolls, they're bridges between past and future, between tradition and innovation. Sarah, now the official junior creative consultant for the Heritage Collection, stood to present each graduate with their certification. Elegant documents that detailed not just their technical proficiency, but the unique character of their work. She had insisted on handwriting part of each certificate, understanding that personal touches mattered. "But this isn't an ending," Thomas said, lifting his father's journal. "It's a beginning. Each of you will now go on to train others, to share. Not just techniques, but values. Some of you will work here at Hayes Toys, others will establish your own workshops, but all of you are now part of a legacy that stretches back generations and forward into the future." The first graduate approached. Maria, whose work with reclaimed wood had already gained attention for its innovative beauty. Thomas handed her a specially chosen carving knife from his collection. "This was my father's favorite tool for finding faces in the wood," he said softly. "I think he'd be proud to know you'll be using it now." One by one, the graduates came forward, each receiving a tool that matched their particular gift. James, who had a talent for mechanical movements. Chen, whose delicate touch with detail work was unmatched. Sophia, who could read wood grain like poetry. Eleanor stood to make her own announcement. "Hayes Toys is establishing the Miller Grant for Traditional Craftsmanship," she declared. "Each year we'll fund 5 new artisans to study under our masters, ensuring this knowledge continues to grow and evolve." Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion. The workshop around him hummed with possibility. Advanced safety equipment. Alongside traditional tools, computer stations for documentation next to carving benches, apprentices and master craftspeople working side by side. Sarah tugged at his sleeve, pointing to the window. Outside, a line of children and parents waited for the afternoon tour. A regular event now, where visitors could watch artisans at work and learn about the craft of toy making. Among them, he spotted Mrs. Henderson, who had become a regular visitor, often bringing her grandchildren to watch the magic unfold. "Mr. Miller," Sarah said, her voice carrying the wisdom she'd gained over the past year, "remember when you told me that sometimes when things break, we can make something even more special from them?" Thomas nodded, thinking of that first day, with Clara's broken pieces. "Well," she continued, gesturing to the graduates, the workshop, the waiting families, "look at everything we built from that moment." He looked around at what they'd created, not just a new line of toys, but a revival of traditional craftsmanship, a bridge between generations, a way of creating that honored both progress and tradition. Each workspace was unique, personalized, by its artisan, while maintaining the high standards they'd established. The walls were lined with both technical diagrams and inspirational pieces, safety certificates alongside artistic awards. "We didn't just fix a broken doll," Thomas agreed. "We mended something much bigger." The afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching the tools and works in progress, creating a gentle glow that seemed to encompass past, present, and future in one warm embrace. The applications covered Thomas's desk like autumn leaves, each one telling its own story. Hundreds of aspiring craftspeople from around the world drawn to the Heritage Collection's apprenticeship program. Some were experienced woodworkers seeking to refine their skills. Others, complete beginners who had been touched by the magic of these handcrafted toys. All of them shared a common dream to create something meaningful in an increasingly disposable world. "Look at this one," Sarah said, carefully sorting through the papers. Now 12, she had grown into her role as junior creative consultant with remarkable grace. She's a retired engineer who wants to combine her knowledge of mechanics with traditional woodworking. And here's one from a young man who learned carpentry from his grandmother in rural Japan. Thomas smiled, remembering his own apprenticeship under his father. "Every craftsperson brings their own story to the work," he said, picking up another. "Application. That's what makes each piece unique." The Heritage Workshop had expanded beyond its original scope. What started as a toy-making renaissance had evolved into a movement celebrating traditional craftsmanship in all its forms. Hayes Toys had become known not just for their dolls, but for their commitment to preserving and advancing age-old skills. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face alight with excitement. "The education initiative is approved," she announced. "Starting next semester, we'll be partnering with local schools to introduce woodworking programs." Sarah's idea about teaching children basic crafting skills really resonated with the board. "Because kids need to know that not everything comes from a factory or a screen," Sarah added, wise beyond her years. "Sometimes the best things are the ones you help create yourself." Thomas reached for his father's journal, now accompanied by several volumes of his own. Each page documented not just techniques, but the philosophy that had transformed a simple repair shop into a global center for traditional craftsmanship. Future generations would have not just the how, but the why of their craft. "We've received inquiries from toy makers in Europe and Asia," Eleanor continued. "They want to establish similar programs to revive their own traditional crafting methods. The Heritage Collection has become a model for sustainable artisanal manufacturing." Through the workshop windows, Thomas could see his graduate apprentices teaching their own students, each adding their unique perspective to the craft while maintaining its essential spirit. The workshop had become a living legacy, breathing new life into old wisdom. "Did you ever imagine," Sarah asked, holding Grace in her hands, "that fixing my doll would lead to all this?" Thomas thought about that autumn day, about a crying child and a broken toy, about how the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out into the world in unexpected ways. "Sometimes," he said, picking up the latest application, "the best things in life grow naturally, like the grain in a piece of wood. You can't force it, you just have to listen and follow where it leads." The workshop bells chimed softly in the afternoon breeze. Dozens of them now, each crafted with the same care as Grace's first silver bell. Their gentle music was a reminder that some songs only grew sweeter with time, that some stories were meant to be passed down, generation to generation, gathering new voices while keeping their original heart. The holiday window display at Hayes Toys' flagship store drew crowds from morning until night. Behind the glass, a wonderland of Heritage Collection pieces told the story of traditional craftsmanship in the modern world. At its center, in a place of honor, sat Grace, the doll that had started it all, alongside dozens of her handcrafted sisters, each unique, each carrying its own story. Thomas stood back from the crowd, watching children press their faces against the glass, pointing out their favorite pieces to patient parents. Next to him, Sarah held her tablet, documenting reactions for the company archives. Now, in her teens, she remained the heart of the Heritage Collection, never losing her ability to see the magic in each creation. "They're not just looking," she observed, "they're dreaming." Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The window display wasn't selling toys. It was offering possibilities, showing a world where things could still be made with care and meaning, where craftsmanship could bridge generations. Eleanor joined them, carrying a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "The first piece from our new youth apprentice program," she explained, handing it to Thomas. "I thought you should be the one to open it." Inside was a carefully carved music box, its surface showing the slight imperfections of a beginner's hand, but also the unmistakable touch of genuine care and attention. When Thomas opened it, a familiar tune played, the same melody as Grace's silver bell, but interpreted through fresh eyes and young hands. "They're learning," he said softly, running his fingers over the carving. Not just the techniques, but the heart of it. The Heritage Workshop had become more than they'd ever imagined, a place where past and future met in perfect harmony, where traditional skills found new expression through modern understanding. Every piece that left their workbenches carried forward the legacy of countless craftspeople, while adding its own verse to an ongoing story. Sarah touched Grace's display case gently. "Remember when I thought breaking Clara was the worst thing that could happen?" Thomas smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that autumn afternoon. "Sometimes our greatest losses lead us to our greatest discoveries." Eleanor checked her watch. The evening tour group will be arriving soon. Another full house, artists, educators, parents, all wanting to learn about bringing craftsmanship back into children's lives. Through the store windows, they could see the sun setting on the city, its light catching the natural wood grain of the heritage pieces, making each one glow with inner warmth. The world outside might rush by in its usual hurry, but here, in this space they'd created together, time moved at the pace of careful hands and thoughtful hearts. "The future is in good hands," Thomas said, watching a young apprentice demonstrate wood selection to an attentive group. In every corner of the workshop, stories were being born, skills passed down, wisdom shared. Each creation that left their benches would carry forward not just craftsmanship, but the understanding that some things were worth taking time for, worth doing right. Grace's silver bell chimed softly in the evening air, its familiar voice now, joined by a chorus of others, each unique, each adding its own note to a symphony of creation that would play on through generations to come.